Well, Nick Kristof, so nice of you to have us back out to your family farm here in Yamhill, and on this stormy day, we're nice and dry in your barn.
Welcome back to the most beautiful farm in the world.
Well, I think that you've been doing a lot of thinking out here and considering a big decision. There's been a lot of buzz about this. So what have you decided?
I've decided I am going to run for governor of Oregon.
And has that been a tough decision?
You know, it was tough in the sense that I'm leaving a job that I loved, but I love Oregon more. And I exist only because of this state's generosity toward a World War II refugee who was my dad. And Oregon welcomed him here, gave him a great education, gave him opportunities, gave his son opportunities and a great education. And that was the Oregon of my childhood. And I've told you how all of the local kids were on the school bus together to Yamhill Grade School, Yamhill Carleton High School, and then jobs went away and people self-medicated. And my 7th grade crush was homeless for 7 years. The 5 kids who got on the bus right after me died one after the other. And it's heartbreaking to see this in a community that you love and to know that that is happening around the state. At this point, more than a quarter of the kids on my number 6 bus are gone from drugs, alcohol, and suicide. And that is just so frustrating. And, you know, Laural, I'm confident we can do better as a state, but I do think that's going to require vision and leadership and sending a different kind of leader to Salem. And I think I can provide that vision and leadership.
Do you think you're that person who can fix those problems?
I think that, well, Tom McCall was from your station way back when, and he was, of course, a journalist who became governor. And what he brought was a bully pulpit, a willingness to articulate an agenda for the state, and then rally the public behind it, bridging divides in this state. So KGW provided a pretty good model of the kind of leader who can make a real difference for this state in ways that have benefited people here for years and years afterward.
So you see Tom McCall as a role model of the kind of governor you want to be. He was a 2-term Republican. He championed the environment. When he was at KGW, he did a documentary that was award-winning on pollution, went into politics, and he was known for bringing people together.
That's right.
But times are different now. The state is so divided. Do you really think you can bring people together?
I think we have to try. And it breaks my heart when I see 3/4 of the state by geography talking about seceding and going to Idaho. That obviously isn't going to happen, but it reflects a real division. And the debates we've had over vaccinations and masks reflect likewise this incredible distrust in much of the state. That's not good for anybody in Oregon when we are so divided. I think that as a liberal from a conservative rural area, maybe I have some natural advantage in trying to build bridges and try to bring people together, and I believe it's time to try.
Do you think that the people in rural Oregon, though, will still see you, even though you're from rural Yamhill County, as a liberal progressive who came from the Northeast, who went to an Ivy League school? How do you break that perception?
Look, I was in FFA with a lot of these folks. I showed sheep with them at the county fair, at the state fair. I mean, I have deep, deep roots. And I've noticed that I've sort of tested the proposition that we can create a civil discussion by talking about guns, which is about the most toxic issue out there. And I find that if I sit down with somebody and I talk about, I ask them whether they think a 30-06 or a 308 is better, and then go to some very narrow, very specific issue about what do we do with somebody who's got a domestic violence protection order against them and is a risk to themselves, they're a risk to their ex, how do we reduce that risk? Then you can actually have a constructive civil discussion about that issue. And if we can do that about guns, then surely we can do that about how to improve the economy, how to deal with housing and homelessness, how to deal with education and so many other issues. And at the end of the day, we've got to try to build some bridges.
You don't have any political experience, no executive leadership experience. Some of your opponents do. They've been in the legislature, worked with Oregon organizations. Why should Oregonians feel like they should elect you as governor, someone who was a journalist? Why should they think you would be a good governor?
So you're right that, look, I have not been a politician, I am not a politician, I haven't been a lobbyist. If somebody wants a lobbyist or a politician to keep on the track that we're now on, there are plenty of choices there. What I do offer is a lifetime spent in the trenches with people who've been elbowed aside by their government, doing my utmost to help them address their problems, no matter who stands in the way. And I think that right now is what Oregon needs. It's who I am, it's what I do. Whatever the outcome of this race, it's what I will continue to do all my life, because that's the cause of my life. And I think that's what Oregon needs.
Senate President Peter Courtney told KGW earlier this summer that the value of compromise is no longer valued in Salem, in Oregon government. Is that the kind of environment that you're ready to walk into, and how do you change that?
I think that we can do better than the frayed, constant arguing that we have right now. Washington State is also divided ideologically, but manages to get more things done. And at the end of the day, in Oregon, people spend so much time arguing, battling over this and that, but not actually improving issues of homelessness or issues of education. And meanwhile, my friends on my bus are dying. And during the pandemic, I had friends who relapsed and were homeless with a baby who then, when the parents were high, found the parents' meth stash and was hospitalized. And that just breaks my heart that is happening now during this pandemic, that so many kids were at home and not able to attend school. That there are 23,000 kids right now in Oregon who are homeless. So, I think we have to do a much better job of actually trying to realistically solve these kind of problems in a pragmatic way.
In the last legislative session, Republicans walked out a couple of times. They did it the session before because they feel like their voices aren't being heard, their constituents aren't being listened to, and like you said, not a lot's getting done. If you were elected governor, how do you change that? How do you make them feel more included?
Well, I do think that it does help when somebody who's from farm country, but has solid, 40 years of very liberal credentials, is able to talk to folks across the divide. I have a long record of using my bully pulpit and using the convening power that comes with my column of trying to bring people together to solve common problems. And I think that will help. No, sure, it's going to be difficult, but I think that we can make progress on these issues, and we have to when there are so many folks who are struggling. And it's very personal to me because I have friends who are out on the street, and I worry. I had a friend who overdosed 17 times during the pandemic. She's alive, but I was terrified for her. I don't think anybody can look around Portland or elsewhere and think this is a model of good governance.
People, you mentioned your column, people will look at you and say, Nick Kristof, you're the pinnacle of journalism, working for the New York Times. You had a column where you could report on things that are important to you, all kinds of things that people are disenfranchised, like you were talking about, disenfranchised, writing about that. You had a platform where you could really make a difference on a global scale. How can you give all of that up to run for governor?
It was a wonderful perch, but when your friends and people you deeply care about are suffering and you're attending funeral after funeral, then that perch and writing columns that are read in the White House doesn't mean as much as knowing that you're going to be going to another funeral and seeing the child or grandchild of another old friend overdosing or going into foster care. I grew up with this strong sense of debt and obligation to this state because my dad was admitted here as a refugee, and I want to do what I can to try to solve these issues.
What do you think your dad would think, your late father would think about you running for governor?
oh, he would be, he would be applauding it. He deeply believed in the importance of people participating in government, and the fact that he came from Eastern Europe and saw what happens when dictatorships rule and people don't compete, then, he would be thrilled by that. It's too bad that he's not around to see this. It's strange for somebody to go from journalism into politics, because we're always taught, we're neutral, we don't go near that. But I've spent a lot of time interviewing dissidents and watching them and see them risk their lives and sometimes die for causes they believe in. I was at Tiananmen Square when the troops opened fire on protesters there. And maybe some of that idealism about the power of democracy, about the importance of citizens making a difference, rubbed off on me.
And your mom still lives here on the farm. What does she think about you running for governor?
She's not only the matriarch of Kristof Farms, but also just a model of empathy, of compassion, of giving back. And I think she misses my column, but cares deeply about what has gone wrong in Yamhill County and around the state. She drives through Portland too. And so I think she's thrilled at the idea that there can be a serious effort to try to address these problems. So she already gave me a campaign donation.
Oh, well, good. That's a good thing that
it was
your
a
mom
good sign.
supports. Yeah, very good sign. I have to ask you about a controversy, because there's been some questions about your residency, that whether or not you meet the eligibility requirements of living in Oregon for 3 years before the election. You voted in New York in 2020. Can you clear that up for us?
Sure. I've been an Oregonian since I was picking strawberries and beans way back when. I've owned property here, I have a home here, I've paid taxes here. I'm an Oregonian, period. But I think that, what's more important than checking the boxes here and there is that my soul is here. My bones are here. My life revolves around this farm, around people here, and that's why it's so distressing to see what is happening in terms of public safety in Portland, in terms of education around the state, in terms of housing affordability and homelessness. And it's precisely because I'm so invested in this state that I want to do what I can with other Oregonians to try to put it on a better track.
Some may wonder, if Oregon's home, why didn't you vote in Oregon in 2020?
I could have voted in Oregon, I could have voted in New York. If I'd been a more calculating politico, I would have. But at the end of the day, I could have done so in either place. And I think that's a distraction from these real crises that are afflicting people around the state.
And some of your opponents may take this and challenge it in court. I mean, how much of a distraction will it be when you want to talk about some of these other issues?
I'll have to leave it to them to decide. I mean, I think they'd probably rather talk about that than talk about the fact that we have the fourth worst homelessness in the country, the second worst unhoused population in the country, and so other folks may well raise it, but I am an Oregonian, period.
If elected, let's talk about what your priorities would be. What are, let's say, the top 3 priorities you would have if you're elected governor?
So issues are obviously all interrelated, and homelessness reflects not only housing prices but also mental health, addiction, educational failure. But if you push me, I guess I would emphasize homelessness, and I think about those 23,000 kids who are homeless across Oregon on any given night. I would think about housing affordability, which makes it so difficult for young people to actually buy a home. And beyond housing and homelessness, I would emphasize education. I think education is the answer to almost every question. I benefited so much from a great education right here in Yamhill. And I think we can do better than a system that right now ranks one behind Mississippi. In a Democratic state with a Democratic supermajority, the idea that we rank that poorly, I think, is deeply sad. And I guess a third issue would be good jobs. And that's maybe a more positive one. We have so much opportunity here to create good jobs in areas like robotics, like biosciences, and maybe most of all in climate tech. Some place is going to establish a hub for climate technology, and it could be Washington, it could be California, it could be Texas. Oregon has a fighting chance to create those good jobs, and whoever becomes that climate hub it's going to be the Silicon Valley for the next 50 years in terms of the job opportunities it creates. It just so happens that we have some of the best geothermal opportunities in the country, in the Cascades. We have amazing opportunities for carbon capture sequestration in Eastern Oregon and basalt formations. We have some of the world's best waves and offshore wind. Somebody was telling me, an expert was saying, you guys are the Saudi Arabia of offshore wind. And we have all these potentials to create climate tech jobs in ways that enrich Oregonians and that also show the world a model for addressing climate change. We can lead the world in that. And so those would be my top priorities, I would say, housing, education, and good jobs.
And speaking of education, in our last interview, you did talk about how you thought that had fallen short here in the state, and that if the state didn't make improvements, that it threatened the future of the state. What specifically would you advocate for Oregon students to make a difference?
So I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I do think that there's, in a sense, silver buckshot. So in early childhood, that's a good farming analogy. So in early childhood, I think we all recognize that home visitation programs are very effective. The best of those programs, perhaps, Nurse Family Partnership, is in 9 counties. It's not in 27. We can do better. Everybody knows that early childhood is enormously important. Yet, and we all talk a good game about early childhood programs, but pre-K attendance in Oregon is lower than the national average. Our 4th grade math scores are 7th from the bottom. Our high school graduation rate, last time I looked by federal standards, was 4th from the bottom. Our idle youth rate is much higher than the national average. People are no longer in school or in a job. So there are many areas that we need to address. We also have a very short school year. We allow kids to drop out before the age of 18 in a way that other states don't. But fundamentally, it's about, I think, making education a priority, and especially making sure that kids stay in school and don't drop out.
Unions are really powerful in the state and very influential in elections. You've been critical of the Oregon Education Association in our last interview and of education in the state. How tough is it going to be? Can you win the governor's race if the unions back one of your opponents?
Teachers are overwhelmingly enthusiastic readers of my column, supporters of me on social media. So I don't know about the union leadership, but I think that teachers and I care very deeply about the same issues. The kind of problems that I'm talking about in Yamhill, where 1 in 7 kids is living with a parent with a substance use problem, that's a tragedy for those kids, for those families. It's also a crisis for those teachers. It makes it really difficult to teach in those areas. The lack of bandwidth for all, meaning that kids can't get on the internet to do homework. The number of homes where there is no book in the house. These are larger structural problems that need to be addressed as well. I understand that teachers, feel that they're being put upon to solve all of society's problems, but I will certainly do what I can to get support from teachers and every other constituency, because I think we do need to bring people together if we're going to try to make life better for kids and for the whole state.
As a political outsider, do you think you can lead the Democratic Party in Oregon?
I think people are ready. I think that nobody looks around the state, from Portland to Pendleton, from Coos Bay to Roseburg, and thinks that things are going swimmingly. I think people appreciate that there is a need to address some of these fundamental problems that housing, homelessness, education, good jobs. And I think that readiness, that consensus that we do need to march forward again, can very much help new governor with vision and leadership.
I wanted to ask you about your neighbors. You've talked about your neighbors, that many of them were in your book, Tightrope. What do they think about you running for governor?
Look, some of my neighbors are Republicans, and so they're not going to vote in a Democratic primary. But one neighbor in particular, at the bottom of the road, he, we disagree on many issues, but he said, I can talk to you. I know that you will listen. I know that you understand the issues around here, and so I'll vote for you. And I think that that's kind of what I'm picking up among people here, that they disagree with me to some extent, but they know that I understand the grassroots issues, that what I bring to the table is not multiple terms in the legislature in Salem. It's multiple terms, if you will, standing by people who've been struggling, who've been homeless, who face addictions, who've lost jobs, who've been to too many funerals. And I think that is why they're willing to work with me and support me, even though they're way more conservative than I might be.
If you had to boil it down in a nutshell, who is Nick Kristof? What do you stand for? And why should Oregonians want you to be their next governor?
I'd say that I grew up in this area and remember a time of upward mobility and promise. And since then, I've seen too many lives squandered, too many problems erupt and not be confronted. And I've come to the conclusion that at the end of the day, we can't solve these problems as a state if we continue to send the same kind of people to Salem to try to address problems that they help foster in many cases. And I do think that I can provide a new sense of vision and leadership for this state that can take it into a new place in ways that will benefit all of us.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just that it's great to have you back on the most beautiful farm in the world. And I guess I'd also say that, I've talked a lot about the problems here, and they do break my heart. But I also think Oregon has so much going for it. And, we have this incredible natural beauty. Companies would much rather have offices and hire people in Oregon than they would in Texas. We can fight for investors to create good jobs here. These are the problems that we have, whether it's homelessness or anything else. These are fixable. These are solvable. Not maybe solvable is a grand word. We're not going to wave a wand and everything is going to go away, but we can address them in serious ways that create vast improvement, and I am completely confident about that.
Nick Kristof, thanks for talking with us. We appreciate it.
Great to talk to you again.